Hey guys, so I've not been feeling great this week, just tired, very low on energy. However, I have managed to win my last 7 games of rapid chess on chess.com with no losses, and I'm kind of in that mode that I feel like I'm playing well. And this is like the holy grail, isn't it, of playing chess. How do you play better chess? How do you play well? How do you win games? So I thought it might be interesting just to get a bit deeper into one game, move by move. Because, bottom line is, you win at chess, you play better chess by playing better moves. And that sounds like a truism. It sounds totally simplistic, right? But that's what it is. That's what differentiates a grandmaster from a beginner. The better players play better moves at chess. And they make the right decisions. They make more accurate decisions. Okay? So let's take a game and let's work through it, move by move. This is a game that I played today. It's about 30 moves. And we'll consider what the different options are. And then why is one move better than another move? All right? And I think it'll be a really, really useful process to go through. Because that's all you need to do. If you understand the rules of chess, you have what you need, basically. To improve, you need to make better moves. And to make better moves, you need to understand what makes candidate move A better than candidate move B or C. Right? And that's kind of it. And there are various things. There might be, for example, that a move wins material, or restricts your opponent's options, or increases your options, or defends something that's undefended. There's lots of kind of short-term tactical considerations that go into moves, but also you're thinking about strategy, as in, do you have an idea, do you have a plan, do you have a way that you could attack your opponent, and also you have to bear in mind defense, right? Because you can't win a game if you lose it first, right? So here's a game. So my opponent was rated just over 1300, and I'm playing with the white pieces, and I play with e4. Okay? Move 1 of the game. Why e4? Why make a pawn move? Well, there are some good reasons. One is that moving the king's pawn means that this bishop and this queen can now move out into the board. Okay? And if they can move out into the board, then it means that they can participate in the battle and maybe coordinate an attack and so on and so forth, right? Opening up this pawn, allowing this bishop out in the game, can lay the groundwork for my king maybe castling kingside at some point later. This move also means that I am now controlling 2 key squares in my opponent's territory, right? So that's why we play e4, d4, c4 very often. C4 as a first move is less ideal because it allows a queen to come out but doesn't release a bishop. So at the beginner and improving level, e4 and d4 are by far the most common first moves, and the reason is that each of those moves releases a bishop. If you move d4, then that releases the dark square bishop, for example. So there you go. So e4, e5 is played, all the same reasons. I play now knight to f3. Why do I play knight to f3? Well, when knights are in this central 4x4 square of the board, which is actually a quarter of the board, then they have a full range. They are controlling as many squares as they can. Okay? If a knight moves outside of this square, then some of these pieces that it could be controlling or protecting or attacking, right, are actually off the board. So the knight's usefulness is limited. And that's why you see knight to f3, knight to c3, and likewise knight to c6, knight to f6, very often in openings. It makes sense. Okay, and also, of course, my knight is attacking the e5 pawn. Black responds with a knight move, thereby defending the e5 pawn, okay? Because black doesn't want to lose material on the third move of the game. Probably the most common opening that I see in chess. And now I play d4. Why am I playing d4? Well, it releases my dark squared bishop, as we've already said. Okay, it's attacking e5. So now we have two attackers on e5 and only one defender on e5. Okay, it's making my opponent have to do something. It's actually like a forcing move. So what I'm trying to do in this game is I'm trying to get the upper hand. It's almost like an arm wrestle. You know, you want to get over your opponent so that they're constantly like this in the game and off balance, whereas you are on top and you can exert your authority on the game. And this is putting a question to my opponent. What's he going to do? It makes him think. So he has the option of capturing the pawn, either with a knight or with his own pawn. Okay, but let's see what happens if he captures the pawn. So let's say he takes there, right? I would actually then move my bishop out into there and play the Scotch Gambit. Okay, so what my opponent does in the game is he captures with the knight. And now I think, okay, what are my options? Should I allow him to capture my knight on f3, which would then, I would then probably recapture with the queen. Maybe that's okay. Okay, or should I capture his knight? So if I capture his knight, his pawn will recapture, and then my queen will recapture the pawn on d4. And then what does the board look like? Well, this is what the board looks like. That's what I played. Okay, I have a pawn in the middle of the board, controlling these squares. I have a queen in the middle of the board, now controlling these squares, right? Black, on the other hand, has no development at all, because he's moved a pawn out into the board, he's moved a knight out into the board, and they've both been swapped off. Okay, so right now I feel like I am ahead of black. Okay, I've actually got two pieces out on the board, although I'm playing with the white pieces. I have two pieces in the board and black has 0, so I'm actually slightly in front. Black now plays a weak move. Right? He's not thinking this through properly. Why is it a weak move? Okay, well, by playing b6, it's pretty clear that black's intention is to fianchetto his bishop on b7. And that makes sense. But it's mistimed because of my next move. So I see what black wants to do. Okay, I see black wants to put his bishop on here on his next move. So I think, is that good for me if black puts his bishop on b7? Well, that would mean that there's a bishop here looking at my developed pawn, which would make me have to do something, giving black some initiative. Yes, the pawn is defended, but that's not the point. What we're talking about is layering up ideas, possibilities, control of the board, scope for your pieces to move, dynamism, all of these things, all of these factors matter. And the choosing of the best move comes down to which of those factors you recognize and appreciate, and then what value you attach to each one depending on the context of the board. Right? So I now spot an opportunity. I think that black has weakened himself, and this is my opportunity. I see queen to d5. Right? Queen to d5, it means that I'm attacking a high value piece. I'm attacking black's rook on a8. And it means that this bishop cannot now go to b7. So I've thwarted black's plan. If bishop goes there, queen captures bishop, and I've won myself a piece. And I'm well ahead in the game. So now, this now forces black to do something else. He cannot do what he wanted to do. He can't bring his bishop out to here, which would mean that the queen is defending the rook, okay? Because I have a light squared bishop there, so he'd get captured. He can't move his bishop to here, because the queen will capture. Okay? So this is all simple stuff, and it's all stuff that I know that you can see on the board. Okay, so what does black do? Well, black has a few options. One is move the attacked rook, oops, not there, move the attacked rook out of the way to b8. Okay, that's an idea. And that's pretty much it, apart from the move that he actually played, which is c6. Okay, so now black has made a pawn move that he didn't really want to make. Moving the c pawn doesn't help his light square bishop to get out into the game, because if the light square bishop now comes to b7, it's now looking at the back of a pawn's head. Not much use, right? This is not a particularly useful move for black. And now black has moved forward 2 pawns there on the queen side. And this all means that it's rather unlikely that black is going to want to put his king there on the queen side and castle queen side. Okay, so this is cutting down black's options by being forced to make a move that he didn't plan to make. His options have now been narrowed down. Okay, so my queen is under attack. I have to move the queen, and I simply move it across to e5 with check. Okay, check is right up there in forcing moves. If you are in check, you have to get out of check on the next turn. Right? Anything else would be illegal. You have to get out of check. So he has some options, right? Let's see what they are. Block with the knight on e7. Okay, if he blocks with the knight on e7, this queen and this bishop are now locked in. Yeah, the queen can't come out of there because he's pushed b6, which was an error. Okay, and the queen can't come this way because the knight will be there. Likewise, this bishop is completely stuck. Right? Very, very simple stuff. Option 2, block with the bishop. That's no good because the bishop is actually busy. It has a job. The bishop's job is defending the pawn on g7. So if bishop goes there, queen goes there, and then I'm attacking the rook again. Right, what have I done so far in this game? It's nothing. There's nothing spectacular. I've simply allowed my opponent to make his moves, and I've judged what I believe are the best responses out of the options that I've got. Okay, and then the third option really is to block with the queen, and that's what black played. So now I need to respond. Now black's queen is looking at my queen, and my queen is undefended. So I have options. Now I can't capture the pawn on g7 because the bishop's still there guarding it. Okay, I could potentially move to c7 if I wanted to, but there's very little value in that. I can't capture the bishop, which is defended by the rook. I can't put black in check or anything, and I can't take these pawns. So there's no benefit to me from going there. Plus, black would come down here, grab the pawn on e4 with check, and also then be attacking c2. So we do not want that, do we, Precious? No, we don't. Okay, so moving the queen down here would be bad for me. So I'm not going to do that. This is what chess is about. Don't make moves that make your position worse. Play the moves, choose the moves that make your position better. Okay, so I decide to move my queen across to f5. This is keeping it in black's territory. It's keeping some pressure on black. It may encourage black to make another move that black doesn't really want to have to make. And it means that the queen and the pawn are both defending each other. It means that my king is still protected from this queen because the pawn's in the way. Now, anytime you've got a pawn and then a queen or a bishop in this structure, then they're both kind of safe. Okay, so it's a useful pattern. And now black decides to play queen to f6. And that's maybe okay, it's a valid move. So black is threatening now to capture my queen, and then if I recapture with my e-pawn, it means that my king is a little bit exposed because we've now got a completely open e-file, and it would mean that I've got doubled up pawns on f2 and f5. Do I want that? Do I want it? Is that an improvement of my position on the board? Well, no, I don't think it is. For that reason, I'd simply drop my queen back to f4. Okay, my queen on f4 is, I think, an improvement in my position. For one thing, when my queen was here, okay, then it's getting x-rayed by the c8 bishop. So if this pawn ever moved forward, suddenly my queen would be under attack, maybe by 2 pieces. Okay, and that is not an immediate threat, but it's a potential threat. And so moving my queen out of the line of that bishop is an improvement because it removes a potential future threat. Okay. Now, the other thing is that putting my queen here on f4 means that it's protected by my dark squared bishop. Okay. So if black chooses to capture, giving up his own queen, taking my queen, and I recapture with the bishop, that's an improvement on the board, okay? Because what it means is that these 2 queens have gone, they're off the board, but look, I've developed my piece out to f4, where it's got nice kind of diagonal action potentially, and black still has no pieces in the board if that happens. So I thought about that, and I decided that if that should happen, that would be okay. That would be an improvement for me. And this is how you win at chess. Okay, so black now decides not to exchange queens, which was the right idea. Now, so black develops his dark squared bishop to the c5 square. What's this doing? What's his idea? So his idea is to attack f7. Of course, currently f7 is protected by my queen and my king. So this is not an immediate threat. Capture on f7. Let's say queens exchange, and my bishop comes out. It's still not really a threat because my king can still defend that square. So this isn't a pressing threat that I have to respond to, which means that I now have time to think about my plans and what I want to do in the game. So let's see what we want to do. Well, what you want to do at the start of the game is you want to develop your minor pieces, get them out into the board, get them active, get them controlling squares. So I look at the board. I can't move my dark squared bishop without a risk here of queen takes b2, right? As we've seen, one of your bishop's jobs at the start of the game is to defend these pawns. They are the only defender of those b and g pawns. So I'm not going to move my dark squared bishop because I would lose material, or potentially lose material. Do I want to exchange queens? That's another important consideration. Well, absolutely no, I do not want to exchange queens. Why? Because what's going to happen? I take the queen. He's not going to double up his pawns by capturing with the g-pawn, right? I take the queen, and the knight's going to come out and recapture. And that is much better for black, because it means that black now has developed a piece into the board for free and cleared the space here so that his king can castle on the next move. So that would be a poor move on my part. So I'm not going to do that. So I decide to develop my knight to c3. Okay, it's getting a piece out into the board. It means that he's got lots of squares that he's controlling, and one of the squares that he's controlling is protecting my pawn on e4. So this is a multi-purpose move, right? I'm doing a few things at once. And I know that my queen is safe, because if black decides to initiate the exchange, it's better for me. So I really don't have to worry about that. These are all the things that we think about before we make a move selection. Now, D7 to D6 is played. Clearly, it's doing a couple of things. It is, I suppose, adding a defender to the bishop there, but the bishop isn't under attack. That's not my concern right now. The main thing that it's doing is releasing this diagonal. It's opening up that diagonal for black's light squared bishop. Now, I'm not really worried about black's light squared bishop at this point in time, because if it goes there, doesn't mean anything. There doesn't really mean anything. There, my pawn can capture it. There, my queen can capture it, and there it can get captured by my g-pawn. So this is not a move that exerts any pressure on me. It's not a move that will prompt me to make a weakening move in any way. And it does start to feel like these advanced pawns are leaving some space around black's position on the queen side that doesn't really work very well for black. If you look at my pawns, very often I try and keep my pawns there if I can. Making unnecessary pawn moves is a very typical thing that beginners do in chess. You think, oh, I'll just make a pawn move. Pawn moves don't matter. Well, pawn moves matter an awful lot. The pawns are the structure of your position, right? And the other thing about pawns is that they can only move forwards. They can never move back, right? So you can't undo a pawn move once it's made. So it's very committal. Now, what are my choices here? I'm still thinking about development. My king is uncastled. My king is still potentially at risk in the middle of the board. You know, bishop to b4 might come. What happens if that happens? Okay. So I need to think about getting my king to safety. So light square bishop comes out to c4. This is doing a couple of things. Obviously, it's opening up the space for my king to castle. But another thing, and a reason why I very often like to put my bishop on this square, is it's looking at f7, black's Achilles heel, black's weakest square. Okay, I'm still not worried about this queen capture because I still know that it's good for me. So I can keep that tension on the board. I can keep that question in black's mind. Ooh, should I exchange? Should I not? Right? Basic things. Okay, so this is an improvement. Black now has to think about castling as well, and he develops his knight out to e7, okay? Because that knight was in the way of the king. The king, because black's made these weakening pawn moves on the queen side, the king's not going to castle there. Never. That would be foolish, right? So the king wants to castle this way, but the king can't castle because the knight's in the way. Now, the queen has moved on to f6, which is this knight's natural development square. And the queen's been stuck there for several moves. What that means is that black has, in making that move, black has deprived himself of the most natural developing move for the knight, which is f6. Okay? What that means is, in turn, that the knight has, if the knight's going to move to allow the king to castle, it's only got two options. It can come out to h6, right? And we know that there's a problem. If the knight's there on h6, look how many pieces, how many squares of the board it's controlling. It's only controlling 4, and it can control 8. So that's why knights on the rim are dim. Okay? Now, sometimes you want to break that rule and put a knight on the edge of the board. Okay, it can happen. We all do it, right? But in this case, black decides, I don't want to put my knight on the edge of the board, because if the knight's here, then it's controlling 1, 2, 3, how many, 4, 5, 6 squares. Okay, so it's slightly better. And so black moves his knight there. However, can you see why this is a mistake on black's part? That knight was doing a job. Okay, it was one of the defenders when it was here, it was one of the defenders of black's queen. Right now, black's queen is still defended, okay? But look at this pawn. It's only defended by the g7 pawn. And now, I look at this and I immediately, because I've been waiting for that knight to move, right? And this would have been the same whichever square it moved to, okay? So basically in playing queen to f6, black set himself up for this, right? I take the queen, the only piece that we can recapture, absolutely forced, black has to recapture, is the g-pawn. And now look at black's position, right? Horrible. Two doubled and isolated pawns, because there's no other pawns on the e file or the g file that can defend or protect these pawns, okay? So he's got 3 slightly advanced pawns on the queen side. He's now got doubled and isolated pawns there on the king side, and suddenly his prospect, his idea of castling king side, looks extremely dubious, okay? And you can see, let's trace this back, right? All of this came down to the fact that he hadn't castled and that he moved his queen to that square, okay? Moved his queen to there. It wasn't a huge threat. I wasn't about to initiate the exchange and allow him to develop the knight to f6 early on in the game, giving him the initiative and the advantage. No way, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move my queen back where it's defended by my own bishop, and I'm going to bide my time. And this queen is stuck there on the knight's natural developing square, looking a bit stupid, okay? And a few moves are played, and then finally the knight comes out because black knows he has to castle, and he can't castle queenside, so he's got to go there, so he's got to move the knight, and he ends up with a serious positional disadvantage, okay? Right, now, I develop my final minor piece, and it's come to here. I think that this pawn looks like a serious weakness on black's part. This bishop could potentially maybe drop back to g3, where it's in a very, very solid position. It would also then be blocking off this semi-open file, because one flip side, one slight silver lining for black in having had to make this move, g takes f6, is that he now potentially can swing his rook across and look at this semi-open file on my side of the board. Okay. Now, if I was to castle my king and put it there, that could be a risk. So, you know, the idea of maybe putting my bishop there might be a good thing. Okay. It's also just looking down at this side of the board, because I don't know where black's king is going to go now. That king is looking vulnerable and exposed and can't castle, really. So I move my bishop out there. It looks like a generally good move, and what's more, moving it off c1 means that I have the option now of castling queenside as well. And if I castle queenside, my rook is going to end up on d1, a semi-open file, looking up the board towards black's king, etc., etc. Okay? You can see it's all little things, little possibilities, little potential attacking ideas, right? Little potential defensive ideas, putting the bishop there. Right, let's see what black does. Black moves his bishop to d7, okay, and this looks like a decent move, right? He's moving out of the king's way, so maybe he does end up castling queenside. We shall see. Another thing it's doing is that it's defending this very weak-looking pawn and that was previously undefended there on c6. Fair enough. Okay, now I notice that, you know, this pawn is maybe slightly underdefended, but also this bishop is still looking at that pawn. So maybe I'd like to castle queenside and put my rook there. But if I do that, that would leave this pawn without a defender. So I play a sensible building move. I'm defending my own pawn because now it's defended by g2, and what's more, I'm adding another defender to e4. Okay, so small but sensible positional moves that are just generally solidifying and improving my position, right? It's not spectacular. Black now, where is he? Is he intending to castle queenside? Is he thinking that if I castle queenside, then he's going to mount a pawn storm? Is he trying to prepare b5 maybe to kick this bishop? But then my bishop can very easily just drop back, or even come back to any of these squares if it wants to. It's got lots and lots of options. I don't see the point of that move. It's another unnecessary pawn move in my book. Okay, so now I decide I'm going to castle queenside because I like the development of putting my rook straight there on d1. Now that I don't have a d pawn, this is always something to bear in mind. Because I don't have a d pawn, it means that this d file is semi-open. That means that I don't have a pawn on it. Now, you can never move through your own pieces. You can never capture your own pieces, right? So sometimes your own pieces can be a disadvantage, particularly if you are a rook, because rooks love to look down long, straight lines, okay? What this also means is that in one move, I have put my king in safety, and what's more, with my rook coming straight there, look at this pawn now. I have two attackers. Two attackers on the pawn and only one defender in the form of that bishop, okay? Forcing move. It means in the next turn, I could jump in there with my bishop, capture the pawn, win material, okay? Take away one of the defenders of that bishop, and completely open up the d-file. Black now comes out with a kind of counter-attack. So putting his bishop there is looking now at my undefended bishop on c4. And what's more, he's kind of trying to tempt me into capturing the bishop, in which case f captures e6, and then he would have a row of 6 pawns, so he'd undouble these and he'd unisolate them as well, right? So, should I capture the bishop? Absolutely not. There's no way I am helping my opponent to improve his position by capturing that bishop, okay? So, I've got some choices. One is drop my bishop back to b3. But then I think, well, what if he captures on b3? I then have to recapture with either my a pawn or my c pawn, and I don't really fancy the idea of that. Okay. Now, if my bishop moves out of the way and he decides to capture a2, well, that's no good because my knight will take it. So I figure to maintain my king's safety on that side of the board, that the best move to play is bishop to e2. Why e2? Well, if it moved to f1, then it stops this rook from being able to come in and have some fun, because I may want to double up my rooks on this semi-open file. Okay. If it had gone here to d3, it would have blocked this rook's vision up the semi-open d file. Right? All about this right now. Okay. So it's not a great place for that bishop to go, but in this instance, it is the best move that I could find. Alright, so that bishop might feel a little bit awkward later on in the game, but maybe I can get it back in. And it's still on this diagonal, it's still looking at the a6 pawn. If this rook ever abandons its post, then maybe the bishop could come in. So it's doing something, but more importantly, it's not in the way. Okay, Black plays another pawn move. He's making far too many pawn moves, I think. What he doesn't realise is that I have two attackers on that pawn, so I simply go ahead and grab the pawn. It's free material, and it doesn't weaken me. Okay. Now he could have recaptured with the bishop, in which case I'd have recaptured with the rook. Instead, he plays bishop e3 check. Now, if you ever play a check, you need to think, okay, how does this improve my position over my opponent? Does it strengthen me? Does it weaken them? Now, in this case, it doesn't. It doesn't weaken me. It actually prompts me to play king to b1, which I probably wanted to do anyway, adding a second defender to the pawn on a2. And yeah, I just don't see the point. I don't see the point in that move. I think that, but this is something that happens. This is something that you see over and over again. When you can get a slight advantage over your opponent, right? When you remove or restrict your opponent's opportunity to make good moves, they're more likely to make poor moves, right? They're more likely to make moves that don't really have a point, that don't really improve a situation. Okay, now, so then he moves his knight out to g6, probably with the idea of maybe coming down here, maybe attacking this bishop, okay? That doesn't concern me too much. The bishop's defended by a knight, and actually, right now, this bishop is not my best piece whatsoever, okay? It's stuck looking at one of its own pawns, and here on this side, black now has a little mini pyramid of light squared pawns. So this bishop's scope right now is pretty poor, so again, that's a move that doesn't concern me at all. I decide to now lift my rook. This is doing two things, okay? One, it's attacking the undefended dark squared bishop that's just moved into my camp for no reason whatsoever, other than to help my king. And secondly, it's creating space for my rook on the h-file to come to d1, doubled rooks on now what is an open file. Happy days. Okay, now this is interesting. So this is a counter-attack, okay, which is a common tactic. So now if I capture the bishop, then black can capture my bishop. Okay, now do I want to do that? It's just exchanging pieces off the board. Material is actually broadly equal. I'm up one pawn, that's it, right? So which is the best bishop? Do I want to remove this bishop in exchange for losing that bishop? Not really. So I move my rook across, carry on with the plan, rook h to d1, adding two defenders to that bishop, and maybe there are attacking opportunities to follow. Okay. Bishop comes out of trouble and is also attacking h2. So we've got two attackers on here, two defenders. So I'm not concerned about this. So let's say bishop takes, rook takes, and now rook can't take because I take rook, and well, I mean it's equal, but then I've got a rook there that's going to be looking at all of these pawns and this very weak pawn because that's doubled. So I just calmly play g3, kicking the bishop away. Bishop comes back, and now I play f4, kicking the bishop one more time. Okay, bishop's only actually got one square it can go to now, unless it captures on there. So he does a counter-attack. This makes sense. Attacking my rook. And I simply move my rook back to here. This bishop is now defended twice. And I've still kept my rooks on the semi-open file. Now black, I think, makes a slight improvement actually here. And I capture with the b pawn. So now I have doubled and isolated pawns on the c-file, right? But that's not too much of a concern. My king is actually relatively safe there. Black has his own pawns here, so these rooks aren't going to cause me trouble anytime soon. I may have an opportunity to undouble, so I'm not too concerned. Okay, so I recapture. Black now captures my bishop. That's fine. I recapture. Okay, I actually worked all of this out before I moved that rook down. You know, I thought he can capture there, I recapture. He can capture there, I recapture. The bishop is still safe. Okay, and that's exactly what happened. Now he moves his rook forward, so clearly he's preparing to double his own rooks on the d-file. So I double my rooks on the d-file. He puts his rook over, and now I move my king to c1. So it's simple calculation. Right? Let's say I want to move my bishop away. We've got rook takes, I recapture, and if rook takes, now king can recapture. So it's simply adding a second defender to the rook on d2. And this is simply a blunder. Right? He's exchanging a rook for a bishop. There's, no other way to describe it. And this is an even worse blunder. But I now blunder because I now realise that all this subtle arm wrestling has now put me in a position where, okay, I'm up the exchange, my pawns are in a better structure, and he's going to be left with a knight, right? He's got a knight for my rook, and my rook is a long-range piece. It can zip all over the board, and this knight is slow. It's going to be slow in the endgame, particularly when I've got pawns on both sides of the board. So how can that knight possibly, cover both sides of the board? It can't. Now, what I realise I should have done here is simply grab his rook, because it's defended by my rook on d1. I missed that because this is just it's a common thing when you realise that you're in a winning position. It's very easy to take your foot off the gas a little bit and to not play the most accurate move. So I grab a pawn. I know that my rook on d1 is protected by the king. He moves his knight in, I grab his rook, king recaptures, and we're just in a situation that's clearly winning for white. Okay, all I've done is made good moves, and now after my next move, putting my rook there, I'm not really attacking the knight, but I'm attacking this pawn. My opponent resigns. Okay, so what have I done in the game? Have I done anything spectacular? No. What I've done is, from the start, I considered my possibilities, my candidate moves, right? I evaluated based on quite simple tactical, positional, strategic factors, which I thought would be best, which I thought would be safest, which I thought would be the most solid, and which I thought would improve my board, improve my position in the chess game, okay? And also be detrimental to my opponent. Okay, when you do that better than your opponent does, that's how you win at chess. Okay, it's as simple as that, really. But it's also complex. Okay, you just have to consider those factors and do it better than your opponent does. And that's it, guys. Okay, hope this has been useful for you. See you next time.